It's been 1 year to the week since we got the It Was Agatha All Along reveal in Wandavision. And in this video, I thought it would be interesting to do a retrospective to see where all the hot books that popped off during that show are sitting today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're going to do a retrospective on all of the hot books that popped off during WandaVision. Because at the time of recording this video, it's been 1 year since we got the Agatha Harkness reveal in the famous It Was Agatha All Along episode. So I thought it would be really interesting to take a look back and see what some of the values of the books that were hot during WandaVision sit today, and if any of them are still worth picking up. But before I get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, do one of those things, I would appreciate it. And I also still have my 10,000 subscriber giveaway contest going on. I actually did cross the 10,000 subscriber threshold, so thank you all so much for hitting that subscribe button. But the contest is still going on through the rest of the week, so if you want a chance to win one of the prizes that I'm going to be giving out, be sure to navigate over to that video and give yourself a chance to win after you watch this one, of course. And of course, we got to get into it now. Let's talk about some of the hot books that occurred during WandaVision and kind of take a look at where they sit today. Now, a couple prefaces here is that I'm somewhat cherry picking the data. I mean, a lot of this stuff is anecdotal from what I remember. I mean, I did go back into some of my videos to see like what I was talking about with the current prices at the time of the show, and I'm just like sort of giving you guys a snapshot overall on where the books are, across certain grades that had, higher census counts. So let's kind of hop over to the slides that I put together and we'll kind of talk through each book and see if we can kind of paint a story of where this book sits today. Now, the first book we got to talk about, of course, is Astonishing X-Men #6, first full appearance of the organization known as SWORD, also the first appearance of the leader of SWORD, Abigail Brand. And this is a book that, of course, got hot during WandaVision because we had the reveal that SWORD was sort of this new organization that was outside of, the town that Wanda was in. Generally speaking, I think SWORD is a pretty cool organization, but typically, organizations like AIM or SWORD or, the TVA or even SHIELD, those books tend to have expiration dates because, it's very exciting when they, come into the MCU, but it's not like people are always going to be excited when SHIELD shows up in like the Winter Soldier movie, unless there was an actual Disney Plus show called SHIELD or called the TVA, maybe those books would be able to sustain in value, but typically they don't usually do that. But this book, however, is kind of an exception, and one of the reasons for that is that not only is it the first full appearance of SWORD, but it is also the first appearance of Abigail Brand, who right now is still speculated that, might be being played by Emilia Clarke in the Secret Invasions show. So we can see the CGC 9.8. Back then, it was selling around the $315 range, and now it generally sits around the $330 range. I mean, that was some of the last sales for this book in a 9.8 grade. So typically, this book over the course of the year has gone up 5%. I mean, maybe there's been other peaks, throughout the summer. Maybe there's been other lows throughout the winter, but generally speaking, this book has traded sideways. And I think one of the reasons for that is that people still believe that, Abigail Brand might be coming to the MCU. And certainly we're not done with SWORD as an organization. We only just learned about them in WandaVision. So you got to think that they're going to play a role in the Secret Invasion show. All right, the next book we got to talk about here is one that has had a big correction. And this one, of course, is West Coast Avengers #45 from 1989, first appearance of White Vision. Now, of course, we all remember, the reveal that we had White Vision now in the MCU. People went absolutely bonkers for this book. And this one has probably become the most infamous book as far as like, the Disney Plus effect and books getting out of hand. And as you can see right there, CGC 9.8s, back then when we got the reveal for this book, there were actually a few that were being sold around that price point of $1,400. So this was a book that was basically selling for, $250 or so. Like in 2020, we get the White Vision reveal. It skyrockets all the way up to $1,400. And now currently where it sits is, a book that generally sells around that $500 mark. So, from a high to a low, you can see that this has had a pretty massive pullback, a 64% correction. But interestingly enough, like it feels like we're not done with White Vision. The book is going to go up. It's just a matter of like, will it ever be able to reach those peak values again? Probably not. Maybe it can start to go up to 600, 700 or so once we get White Vision back in the MCU, but it'll definitely be hard to go up to that, peak height where it was at $1,400 once upon a time. Now, if we look at the average raws back then, once we got the reveal, they were selling around $85 to $120. Now you can find them on eBay from $25 to $50. So another book that has had a correction not only across its graded copies, but also across the raw copies as well. All right, the next book we got to talk about is Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16 from 1982. And you guys know this book. Of course, it is the first appearance of Monica Rambeau, who also is known as Captain Marvel. Now, this is a book that we got the reveal of Teyonah Parris as Monica Rambeau in the WandaVision show. And this book is one that definitely got hot over the course of the show. It's actually really funny because this is a book that, it actually took, a couple weeks in the show for it to reach its peak potential. And I think it was after she finally got her powers was when it definitely reached its height. So back then, we look at some of the CGC 9.8s, generally speaking, they were hitting around that $1,100 range. Now, if you look at them, the CGC 9.8s typically sell around $850. So there's been a 25% correction. But to me, that feels like pretty normal. Like it feels like a normal pullback for a book that, sees its height and excitement with the character and now has that little bit of a correction. And, I think that there's still room for this book to grow because we really haven't seen Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau do anything cool yet. I mean, it seems like this is going to be a character that they're going to build upon. Currently there's rumors that she might show up in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Certainly she's going to show up in the Marvels in 2023. So it feels like, if she starts to do more cool things in the MCU, this is definitely a book that can reach those peak numbers once again. So to me, this still feels like a good book to get your hands on if you are someone who is a fan of this character. It had its normal correction, but it is still a book that has a bright future. Now, the other book we got to talk about is the one that is sort of related to that, and that is Mighty Avengers number 1 from 2013. And what is the significance of this? Well, this, of course, is when Monica Rambeau becomes Spectrum, or she takes up the moniker known as Spectrum. Now, they haven't actually called her Spectrum yet, but when we think about what they're going to do with the MCU, it is most likely that she's going to be taking up this name. I mean, we already have Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, and I just don't see, the MCU having two Captain Marvels in name out there, like in the continuity. I mean, maybe in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, she's going to be called Captain Marvel because she's from a different multiverse. But as far as, our Monica in our timeline, I feel like she's going to be known as Spectrum. And so maybe in the Marvels, that's when she's going to be getting this name. And when she does get the name, this will definitely be a book that picks up in the market. Already people were specking on it. Back then during WandaVision, CGC 9.8s were selling around the $300 range. Now they sell around the $110 range. So you can see, definitely a 60% correction. But the average raws for this book were selling around 15 to 20 back then, and now still sell for 15 to 20. So it feels like, maybe there weren't that many CGC 9.8s available. So people were having to pay that $300 price to get their hands on it at the time of WandaVision. Over the course of the year, people send in more books, people get more things graded, and now there's more supply. So it has that correction down to 110, and this book is, pretty available to anyone who wants it. But kind of like the ASM Annual 16, I still think that this is a book that has a bright future in front of it. Although because this is a newer book, a 2013 one, I think that this one is going to be more volatile in the market. There's going to be peaks for this thing that get really, really hot, and then there's going to have, big valleys where this book gets forgotten in the market. Whereas the ASM Annual 16, I think is going to be more consistent overall. Higher risk for Mighty Avengers number 1, but could be a good ROI if you buy and sell at the right price point. All right, let's go on now to the next book here. And of course, we got to talk about Fantastic Four number 94 from 1970. First appearance of Agatha Harkness. Now, this, of course, is the book that kind of inspired me to do this video in the first place, because it was 52 weeks ago today that we got that reveal that it was Agatha All Along. And this is a book that overnight absolutely exploded in the market. But, it's had ups and downs throughout the course of the year. It had a pretty decent correction after the WandaVision show, but then there was an announcement that we were going to be getting an Agatha Harkness Disney Plus show, and that's when this book, jumped back up again. But, typically speaking, we can see that this book has grown over the course of the last year, even across the different grades. I mean, it hasn't necessarily been a straight line to the moon, but generally speaking, it has maintained its value and grown some across certain grades. So CGC 9.4, back then, there was a sale around $960. Now there was a sale, in this year for $1,629. So a 70% increase. So again, another example of a book that even though it got hot at the time of WandaVision, it actually is still, kind of holding its value overall. Although when we look at the average raws, when we got the Agatha reveal, there were raws that were selling, around the $160 range, $180, $200, etc. Now you can go onto eBay and find this book around the $125 range. So in some senses, this book has corrected back down, but in other senses, this book has grown in value. All right, let's move on now to the next book here. And this one I think is really interesting. This is Vision and the Scarlet Witch, number 12 from 1986. First appearance of the twins, Tommy and Billy. Now, this book has actually kind of surprised me a little bit because, generally what I say is that books are only as valuable as they are relevant to pop culture. And I think generally that is the case with most books. And so when we got WandaVision and we had the birth of the twins, Tommy and Billy, this book was definitely at its peak, selling $400 in a CGC 9.8. And for me, it's like, okay, once we get that moment, we're never going to see that moment again. Tommy and Billy are going to grow up, they're going to become Wiccan and Speed, and people are going to be looking at Young Avengers number 1. But when we flash forward to today and we see where this book sits at the 9.8 grade, there's still sales actually around the $300 range. So although this book has corrected 25%, I actually would have thought that it would have corrected even more than that. Average raws at the time when this was going on during WandaVision were actually selling around $30 to $40, and now they also kind of sell around, $30 to $40. So this is a book that I think has surprisingly been able to keep some of its value, and maybe is an example of kind of price memory. I mean, maybe people are still holding on to this book, having some relevance when we get Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, because we all can assume that Wanda, is going across the multiverses looking for her twins. So it still has some relevance in that way. But for me, if I was someone who wanted to spec on Tommy and Billy, I would definitely be looking to Young Avengers number 1. All right, the last couple of books we'll kind of talk about, in rapid fire here. But these are some of the ones that I think were interesting spec books that didn't really pay off in WandaVision. And of course, the first one we got to talk about is Avengers number 9 from 1964. First appearance of Wonder Man. Now, I know you guys are already looking ahead at that CGC 8.0 and you're seeing that 40% correction. But before we conclude that this book has tanked, we got to get one thing clear. That 2280 sale was a peak high, and there just weren't that many sales to go off of in the data. And actually, if we throw out that number and we look at some of the other sales, we saw this book being sold around that same $1,300 range, sometimes $1,000, sometimes $1,100. And then now again, we see it being sold for $1,380. So I would generally say that, outside that big number of 2000, this book has kind of traded sideways. And one of the things I think is interesting about this book is that, average raw at the time for which this book was being sold during WandaVision was actually around the $80 range, maybe to 80 to 120. And the reason I remember that is because I was thinking of selling mine at that time, and I can just remember what the prices were. But now if you go into eBay looking for this book, I mean, maybe there are a couple like really, one beat up 1.0s being sold around the $100 range, but typically speaking, the low grade versions of this book do sell around the $200 range. So, this one I think is really interesting to me because, it was a book that people were sort of speculating on. Maybe Wonder Man was going to be coming to WandaVision, but it never really popped off. But generally over the year, kind of having its head under the radar, this book has actually slowly kind of grown, at least in terms of the raw values. Now, it has had some drop-offs in its graded comic books, so probably a book that got ahead of itself because of the speculation with WandaVision, but one that has still been able to kind of grow slowly in value due to the rate of inflation, and also due to the fact that this is still a classic Silver Age book. Similarly, another spec book that was kind of like the Wonder Man one was Avengers 52 from 1968, first appearance of Grim Reaper. Also, this book is when Black Panther joins the Avengers, but this was a hot book at the time of WandaVision because we got that little Easter egg of the Grim Reaper helmet in the title sequence, and a lot of people were thinking that, hey, maybe Grim Reaper is going to be the main villain of the WandaVision show. Back then, CGC 8.5s were selling around $179. Now they're selling around $192. So kind of, an 8% increase, probably exactly due to the rate of inflation. There's been different highs and lows for this book throughout the course of the year. Average raw back then was around 40 to 60. Average raw now, if you're looking for it on eBay, you can find copies for 50 to 75. So a book that, had a little bit of a spike up because of the speculation of WandaVision, never really got to that next level. All right, and the last book we got to talk about, of course, is Silver Surfer number 3 from 1968. First appearance of Mephisto. one of my personal favorite books. You guys know this. I love Mephisto, and everybody had thought that Mephisto was going to be coming in WandaVision. But let's talk about the CGC 7.0. Again, I was just looking at books that had higher census count, higher volume. Back then, it was being sold around the $1,500 range. Now it's sold around the $1,200 range. So a book that kind of like the Monica Rambeau one has had a 20% correction. I mean, maybe it had at different points of the year a bigger dip than that. But one thing that's interesting about this one is when we look at the average raws, similar to that of the Wonder Man book, average raws back then were being sold around the $200 to $400 range. Again, now this is just anecdotal, but I do remember because I had this book and I was constantly looking at those prices, so I can remember this thing being sold around that price point. Now, when you go into eBay looking for copies of this thing, typically speaking, you're going to have to fork over, between $400 to $600. So even though the CGCs have had their correction and their pullback, the raw prices are still going up. But still a great book to get your hands on, one that could have still a lot of potential in the future. You never really know. Maybe Mephisto is going to come, but is he going to come in the next couple years? Who really knows? Maybe we're going to get a tease to him in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Probably not, but a character I do think that the MCU will eventually use. But that is all I have for this video. That was just me sort of doing a retrospective on all of the hot books that sort of popped off during WandaVision. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of those books? Are you guys still hunting some of those books? Or which books do you think still might be worth, getting your hands on? Anyways, that is all I have for this video. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe. Be sure to hop over to my 10K subscriber giveaway if you haven't done that already. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.